record. Welcome to the Defend Stage's weekly Threat Insights group discussion. We have our agenda linked to the invitation. So for anyone who hasn't taken time to review that yet, please try in the future to do that ahead of the meeting. It's especially helpful when we have demos that can be shared. So if you can watch the demo in advance, then this gives us an opportunity to ask questions versus trying to synchronously watch videos, which we're not going to try and do with our half hour today. So kicking things off, Wayne, you've got the first agenda item.
Yeah, it's just a reminder, I think everybody's heard this, but just in case they haven't, is we have a relatively large customer that has told us they will not renew their contract unless first-class phones and a vulnerability export ships with 1210. So, please prioritize the work on these items above other work as appropriate. Got a link to the issue where we're tracking all the various risks, but we're not going to mention the customer name, since we're recording this and putting it online publicly as our policy. But, I think everyone has already heard it, but just in case you haven't, now you've heard it again. So, any questions? Okay, next item, Lindsay.
Okay. And if you were to look at this tracking item that Wayne just referred to, one of the risks that we've been discussing a bit is this database migration that Ross has been working diligently on for a while now. So I'm going to stop talking and let Ross kind of update us on how that conversation is going with the DBAs. You're muted. It is quiet in libraries. I understand that.
Yeah. I'm all alone in the library too. Nobody's here. It continues to progress. I think we're, to a point where we have a workable solution, and it's a matter of implementing it. Kind of as I mentioned in the ticket here. One thing that we probably need to discuss further is the limit. So we kind of went back and forth in the Slack channel on whether we should just up the limit or remove the limit. The DBA said, hey, let's just up the limit. They suggested 2 times or 5 times 510 characters for the title of a vulnerability seems like a lot, and we don't have very many.
And Ross, did you see my analysis, if it's accurate on the sizes, at least for GitLab.com, for the vulnerability name?
No, I did not.
So what's the current size, maximum length? Is it 255?
Yes, that's so the database.
99.97%, at least on GitLab.com projects, vulnerabilities have less than 255. So it's okay. I think truncating would be okay. The maximum it was 1,500 and change. So it's if you set it to 512, it would be. I'm not saying we should, but if you set it to 512, it would go from 99.97 to a rounding error of 4 nines worth of items. So there's like a cluster at 280 and at 330. So the rest are just, rounding error. So I think a reasonable cutoff is fine. Is it easier to leave it as is, or would you rather change it to maybe 512?
It's easier to leave it as is because we're still going to have to do some truncating regardless of the limit. It's just
Matt, are you good at 256? Sorry, Ross. Are you good at 256?
It's 255. But I guess that's for Matt to confirm. I mean that's basically what you said was all right to begin with, and then we went back and forth. So
yeah, 255. Are you good with 255, Matt?
I just want to make sure that I've got the numbers right. There was a lot of numbers in there. I'm looking at the agenda document and I see that there's 22 records over the proposed 510 character limit. How many records are we going to lose if it's 255 if we keep it there?
0.03%.
And we won't lose them. We'll just lose some of the end. Yeah.
I'm not sure anybody's reading greater than 255 in the title anyway. And anything that's greater than 255 in the title should probably be is likely and should be in the detail.
255
Yeah.
is a long title. Is it possible to have anything that gets truncated moved to the description?
Well, I was hoping to have more information before this call, but I haven't got it. I'm suspecting maybe it's like one particular analyzer that is misbehaving. So we might be able to just fix that one analyzer or something like that. I don't know. I don't have enough data for that, but that would be, in other words, that might be something that's already happening. I don't know. But yes, that would be a good idea. And I don't know. Maybe we don't have enough information to come to a
Yeah, I mean,
conclusion.
I would say, Ross, it would be a nice to have to figure out if that is in fact coming from one particular analyzer, but I tend to agree that since these are generated names, 255 characters is way longer than it needs to be. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that wouldn't cause weird things in the UI as well. So I don't think anyone's going to lose sleep over some truncation there, unless they were trying to stuff the entire issue description into that title, and then you would be losing information. But I would argue that the scanner is misbehaving at that point, and that's not something we should handle with the, with the front end.
Yep. So 255, truncated 255, done.
Okay, cool.
So it doesn't sound like we need to start talking about contingency plans at
Well,
all. It sounds like if this is the level of detail.
Take a look
that
at
you're-
item 3. The other 2 remaining items are a matter of executing on suggestion. So I know, Ross, you've been working diligently with the database maintainers. Do you think this is the last of their feedback? Or do you think they'll have more? Not that you have a perfect crystal ball, of course.
I am hopeful that we're nearing the end. My experience with the database reviews is not, it's not straightforward. So I'm definitely not going to guarantee it.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're concerned about the load this is going to put on the database and, potentially cause instability for the GitLab product overall, whether it's hosted or at client. So they've got legitimate concerns.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to make that clear. Yeah. And the other thing we talked about is if there's a problem with where the migration causes issues for stability, we're thinking about making so that give the SRE team the green light in advance to stop the migration, at least on GitLab.com. If in the unlikely event it does cause a stability issue, and Matt was okay with that. We talked about it just a little while ago, and maybe putting it in the release note saying that this migration is going to happen if you have a large number of vulnerabilities. You like probably let's say more than 500,000, which is going to be a very small number of self-hosted customers, but not zero. To just keep an eye on it, and to potentially, if it causes a challenge, then that they can also stop the migration job. Is that a good summary of what we discussed earlier, Matt?
Sorry, it's on mute. Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. Is that you think that, Ross? Does that make you a little less concerned? Do you think that it make the database maintainers less concerned as well?
I don't know that it will make them less concerned. It sounds good to me.
Okay.
I will say that a lot of projects have migrated already to first class vulnerabilities. Naturally, since we've had it out there for a while, even though it was behind a feature flag. So again, it's not like we're migrating everyone, which is definitely a benefit. These are basically projects that haven't had a successful pipeline in the last 3 months. So depending on how much they use their projects, it may or may not be a problem. It's kind of hard to tell what the profile of those projects looks like. It could just be somebody playing around with something and forget it. But
Okay. Thanks for all your, as always, and everybody, thanks for all your hard work on this. But Ross, I've been watching from the side on all the back and forth with the database maintainers. It's been a lively discussion, that's for sure.
So, and for the sake of the rest of our agenda, we should keep moving. One call out is that this is Ross's sort of finale for the Threat Insights group, and that we've been asked to make sure that if we have other backend requests or needs going forward that we work with Alan and the rest of the Jonathan and Mihao and the rest of the backend Defend developers. So thank you, Ross. We really appreciate it. We will continue to ask you questions as we need to, though. So
Of course.
I've made that caveat very clear, which brings us to our next agenda item.
Actually, Lindsay, sorry.
Go ahead.
One thing, we didn't put it on the agenda, but related to this one, Ross, one thing you and I had discussed was, and I want to make sure that I clearly understand and everyone else does, even if we don't get the full migration of the findings to the first class vulnerability objects, you indicated that the dismissal status of what's there would potentially be persisted, so that we don't end up having customers where they have to sort of redismiss a lot of irrelevant or false positive results. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. And it's definitely something to keep in mind if we're falling back to contingency plans. Like it's definitely something that we should be able to maintain as part of this. So we'll keep an eye on that if we fall back to contingency plans.
And is the database team, are they okay with that particular portion? I think you had indicated they were fine with that piece.
Yeah, that was not the part that was causing problems. So it should be good to go.
Okay, fantastic.
Which basically mitigates our risk around this based on your priorities, Matt, right?
I mean, as best I can tell, yes. I think that's my biggest concern is things that have been dismissed in the past, people with a lot of history there or large numbers of that, having them pop up again when we re-release this.
Right. As I'm watching Avielle's potentially breaking changes over here, that sounds a little bit like it could be in a nuisance for our customers as well. So let's talk about potentially breaking changes outside of this database migration. So, only one had been brought to my attention through Thomas Whittam so far. I linked to the issue that represented the work around this API here in the agenda. Thomas's response was that he doesn't know if this is actually being used, being hit directly by customers, that we don't have any data around this, and he believed that the risk was quite low around this API. So I don't have any history here. I wasn't sure if Avielle or Ross or anyone else does.
So my question around, does this API change still make sense? It would be nice to have the rename so that the vulnerability findings endpoint gives us findings, but we no longer need the vulnerabilities endpoint, REST endpoint, because we're using GraphQL. So we're already going to have vulnerabilities API through GraphQL. So we don't need to do this rename if we don't want to, because it's a breaking change, or if we just don't want to add to our plate.
Would it be a breaking change either way if this API would not still function for the same purpose that it has today once we cut over to our first class vulnerabilities? So is it still a breaking change either way?
I think we'd have to remove the feature flag to make it not a breaking change so that it only ever returns findings. And it is still a bit confusing if we don't change it, because the endpoint that says vulnerabilities is actually returning findings, which isn't great. But I think it's up to us to decide if it's worth making the change now or not, given that we ultimately probably will want to move all of that information into GraphQL.
I think this change has already been made, right? This API has already been renamed. The damage has been done. So I think what you're saying is that maybe we didn't need to rename it, and it would have continued to function fine for customers once we flipped the feature flag.
Yeah.
So if we did have a concern and we believe that customers were using this, one solution would be to just rename it back.
Yes. Yep.
And is there any way of like logging or looking at any kind of statistics to tell us if anyone's hitting this API outside of our product itself?
Not that I know of.
Not that I was aware of. Thomas didn't know either.
I mean, I guess
Okay.
at this point, I would ask what the effort would be to just flip it back. That sounds to be the safest route, because I think, Lindsay, we're not going to be able to tell if any of the self-hosted customers are using this.
If we don't know, right?
Yeah, I would hate to make that assumption and then have, a large customer that's got this baked into their workflow. We just break everything for them. I think that's going to reflect poorly on us. Are
there any, whether it's Jonathan or Alan or another backend developer who's not Ross or Avielle, is there somebody who could look at what the effort would be to basically undo this change and whatever ramifications we would need to address? You know, we're needed to update wherever we're calling the API to use the original name as well.
Sorry, just to clarify, are we talking about changing it back? So it's currently called the Vulnerability Findings API, and that's vulnerability occurrences. Are we talking about changing that API back to being vulnerabilities API?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, that change was made, I believe, several months ago. So I guess I don't know why we would change it back. I mean, if people are using it, they probably switched to the new name anyways.
I see what you're saying. So the customer impact would have been when we made this change back in 2.5, and any notifications or any considerations we should have had around bucketing this into a version release of a breaking change should have happened then, because we've already impacted the customer in whatever way we're going to.
I believe so.
So the change to the route would have been not behind the feature flag, right?
This MR, if you guys review the MR, it actually, this API path currently returns different types of objects depending on the first class vulnerability feature flag state. So there is dependencies on, I don't know about the naming though, I guess is the question. All right, I don't think we're gonna get this answered for this call. Is there somebody that would be willing to take a little bit of time to dig into this and understand if we even have an issue to be concerned with here?
I can dig into that.
Thank you, Jonathan, I appreciate it. And then, sorry, I was just looking at the notes people have added here since we started talking. Avielle, you brought up another potential breaking change. Do you want to describe it for the group?
Yeah, this came to my attention yesterday. We were talking in the secure stage call about what first class vulnerabilities might break and how we're going to test everything. And it was brought up that DAS, the way DAS understands like whether it has a duplicate is based in part on the URL. And the URL can change a lot so that we don't really do a good job deduplicating DAS vulnerabilities. And the reason for that is when, for example, we fuzz, then we'll have parameters that change. Like let's say we're putting a credit card number in the URL and we're fuzzing with, 2424, and then the next one is 0024. And for the customer, that might be an example of the same vulnerability, but we don't have any way to tell that because the URLs are different. So we consider them separate vulnerabilities. Right now, that's mitigated because we're only pulling vulnerability findings from the latest pipeline. So there at least won't be that many duplicates because it's just one run's worth. But when we are now pulling vulnerabilities from all of time that haven't been resolved yet, we're going to be getting a lot of duplicates. So every time there's a pipeline runs, the users might get 200 more DAS vulnerabilities dumped onto their dashboards, which I think could quickly become unwieldy. So I was going to try, I think we have an issue open for trying to figure this out, which I will find and share once I've located it.
Thanks, Avielle.
Yeah, Bill, I tried to write what you said in the notes. If you could review it and correct it, if I got it wrong, that'd be great. And I'd love to see that issue as well, so we can track that when you have that handy.
I will. Also in that call, there were no one brought up a concern that they already know about, but it was raised that we don't, at least that I know of, I don't know what our testing plan is for first class vulnerabilities because we want to make sure that there's no other issues like this that might arise before we release it. So it's kind of one of those like secure and defend cross concerns, and maybe we should have a separate meeting to discuss how we're going to do testing of this.
So we'll touch on it a little bit now, and we'll decide, what additional meetings that we need to set up, Avielle, because this really does segue to what our next agenda topic is. So unless if anyone else has any other breaking changes that they want to call out, we'll move on to the item D here on the agenda. Okay, so I think part of what's going to enable us to do this. So first of all, I'm very new to GitLab, and the ways of testing here are something that I'm learning as I go. So we've been developing different features as part of this MVC over the course of months now, and clearly we've been doing our own verification and testing pieces of this process, but a complete end-to-end test is what we've been really lacking. So making sure that we have a demo, preferably in production, that can be exercised both within this group and with other stakeholders that are very familiar with our process, but haven't been as close to the development of it, has been sort of the approach that Wayne and Matt and I have discussed for testing at this point. If we need to pull in Tanya or folks from SDET, I'm not aware of that, and I would look at Ross and Avielle and Philippe and other folks who have been around longer to educate us on those parts of the process that we might be missing. But thus far, that's been our plan. So as soon as the earlier we can get a complete end-to-end demo available for testing and reach out to our stakeholders to get them to exercise it and give us their feedback and perform this level of user acceptance testing, the better. So part of the reason I added this agenda was to ask this group when we believe we'll be able to do that is. But I guess my question before that is, does that suffice from a testing plan?
I think it's what we got. I don't know if it seems reasonable. I think it'll suffice. I think, input from the secure team, who, some of whom, like Avielle and Ross, have been working on this, and some of whom, and more than just those two folks, of course, and others, the defend folks that are permanent on the team aren't as aware of all the nuances of what goes on the secure side. So I think getting the secure folks' opinions on it will be good. Yeah, I think that's the primary thing we can do to make it sufficient. And then, so we have the feature flag on. If you look at the WebGoat project, and that link, and that's on. And we need to get the latest code out there as it's usable, so that, and then say, hey, it's time to test X because it's ready, because we have a number of things, of course, in flight. Is that kind of a good way to go? Is to declare when it's good to test a particular set of functionality and look at it there?
So it's a bit more piecemeal than I was thinking, Wayne. I think that we should be doing that as issues are resolved and as we move, sort of our implementation feature issues through the pipeline. In addition to that, I think that what I'm targeting is, when are we going to have something that's, for the most part, an end-to-end? I know there might be some.
So code complete, and of course, merged and deployed, so that people can test it. How often is the deployment done to where this is currently hosted?
I believe it's typically twice a week now.
Twice a week. Okay, so relatively quickly after the changes are in. I think most changes are going to be merged within the next, 2 weeks. Not all, but most. Yeah, of course, that's just a prediction, but it's likely going to be the case. I think maybe we do is say in next week's meeting, let's see what has been merged. Let's see what has been deployed of what's been merged, and then see what's there, and then we review it on a week-by-week basis. That it's kind of punting, but maybe that's a good way to go. What does everybody else think? Especially other than Lindsay and I, since we're doing most of the talking.
Seems reasonable to me. By then, my bug fix of creating an issue that is not blank from a vulnerability should be in there. And so that'll be a nice end of the demo, oh, the issue's created.
So I've been personally bucketing this work into two general areas: the security dashboard integration and the standalone vulnerability page. I know there's other backend work that's going on, like the database migration that we just discussed, and some other areas that maybe fall outside of those buckets. I'm just going to ask, and this might be uncomfortable, and apologize in advance. Avielle, do you have an idea, or Avielle Savas, and I know Sam isn't here, of around maybe how much is left to be done in the security dashboard integration, and if you might have a ballpark of when you might be code complete there?
Yeah, so it's going to be feature by feature. The big one is the vulnerability list and the filters for that. And I think Sam linked an MR that he has that will be implementing that, at least on the project dashboard. And that we'll quickly follow that up next week with the group and instance security dashboards. So that'll square the lists away on every dashboard, hopefully by the end of next week. The summary feature on the project dashboard, the backend is about to be merged. And so we'll just need to hook the front end up. So that might, depending on Sam's availability, maybe that'll happen next week as well. And then the last piece is the history dashboard, which I would say is gonna, not the history dashboard, the chart, the historical chart, which I'd say is going to be much closer to the end of the milestone.
And Matt, you've said that the historical charts are the lowest priority. If we don't have them backed by the new first-class vulnerability objects, that we would still launch. We'd still remove the feature flags, even though it might be confusing.
Correct. I don't have any evidence to show that they're so closely monitored that people would even notice the difference. I think that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. The lists are the most important.
Cool. Okay, so then I'm going to look now at Daniel and say, Daniel, for the standalone page and the work that you and Alexander are working on together, do you have any kind of a similar ballpark on when you might be code complete?
So I'm aiming for about 2 weeks from now to have everything into the MR stage, and then code complete will be, you know, whenever the reviewers and maintainers can take a look at it.
Okay, if there's any way that between you and Alexander we can chunk that up and be able to get, you know, smaller pieces into MR sooner, because that puts it at the 14th, right? So, you know, almost even without trying to get a demo to look at ahead of time, that's a bit risky from getting the MRs and reviews completed in a week, right? Just from experience.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to look it over and discuss with Alexander and see what's up.
Thank you. Please do. And then keep us posted. We can do this asynchronously in the Threat Insights channel. But if we do get to a point where bringing additional developers on will help us meet this goal, we want to identify that, you know, as soon as possible. Because I do believe that we've talked to David, and that if needed, there could be help from the secure team available to us.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, and then is everyone in agreement that we should be using the WebGoat project in production for this? I'm seeing no's. I'm seeing some yeses. I don't see a benefit of us targeting staging, because you still have to get through this approval and maintainer reviews to get something onto staging. So with the exception of the fact that I think Ross just said it's twice a week, I don't think that's our big bottleneck. Okay. So we've got 1 minute left. I think my item can wait. You guys saw it in the room. Daniel, go ahead and verbalize your item.
Yeah, I just remembered, but there's an endpoint to resolve a vulnerability, but it does not return 2 properties that we need in order to update the status description. So if anybody resolves the vulnerability, it will still show the user and the timestamp from the last state that it was in. The other 2 endpoints, the dismiss and the confirmed endpoints, do return the properties. So I did bring it up, but I think it was lost in the fray. So I just wanted to kind of bring it up again for visibility.
Yeah. Hey, Daniel, did you make an issue about that by chance?
I did not.
Yeah. If you can do that, we can probably track that. That one should be a fairly quick turnaround on that one.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool. Thanks, Jonathan. And then I want to encourage everyone to watch the demos and to create demos like this. Sam's been associating demos with his MRs, and I have found them to be incredibly helpful. So take some time to watch those if you haven't. Alexander gave us a screenshot of the history issue creation. Thank you, Alexander. That is lovely. And I don't think we're going to get to any planning breakdown discussion.
The other thing is on the videos, I know Sam's out here. It's awesome that Alexander was able to post a screenshot. Sam was able to post some videos. I noticed they're not on YouTube or GitLab Unfiltered. They're local recorded. They'll ask him to move them over.
And again, I was just watching his MRs. I stole them and put them in here to share. His reason for making them was to benefit the reviewer and give them as much context as possible, which is fantastic. But Wayne, to your point, the more we can share that and the more transparency we have around that, the better for the team. So
I'll comment in the doc asking Sam to do that.
And at the very least, sharing in the Threat Insights channel so that we can benefit internally is, yeah.
That's good.
One. All right, everyone. Thank you. Sorry for canceling this meeting for the last couple of weeks. In retrospect, that was a horrible decision. We didn't have anything ready for planning breakdown, but we still could have had a discussion. So thank you for your time. I'll share this meeting and we will move forward asynchronously and talk next Tuesday.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.